Hey, Thomas Westbrook here, and you're watching Atheist Edge.
This was an interesting challenge question. I was tasked with answering either or both of the following questions. What critical thinking advice would you give that wasn't already covered or mentioned in this course? What other critical thinking textbook would you recommend using to teach the subject and why? My response. In the Marine Corps, we use 9 lines. These are laminated reference cards that are Velcro to our forearms like football quarterbacks. They are quick, condensed instructions for everything we might encounter on a mission, like calling for close air support, treating a sucking chest wound, rules of engagements, calling in heavy artillery fire, even Arabic commands to use during an arrest. Each of these cheat sheets are usually 9 lines long for some reason, probably a coincidence, hence the name 9-line. Anyway, I can't think of any additional critical thinking advice per se, but I think a handy 9-line cheat sheet on the critical thinking process would be really helpful in some cases. For instance, Thanksgiving dinner, when my crazy aunt starts talking about the Dominion voting machines made in Venezuela by Hugo Chavez, or if I'm a guest on a Christian apologetics channel and they try to claim that there are 26 references to the Trinity in the Bible and none of them are pseudepigraphs, none of them are interpolations, or trying to convince my super intelligent atheist friend to get the vaccine despite the claim that it's still in clinical trials. As far as textbooks go, it's not a textbook, but Michael Shermer's Why People Believe Weird Things had a big impact on me. And at least a few of the chapters would make a great addition to the current reading list for this course. Richard responds to my idea on the 9-line cheat sheet. That's a good idea. I'm adding it to my development calendar. And his response to my crazy aunt and my anti-vax friend, sadly, I don't think any evidence based on reasoning works on those people. You need a psychotherapist and months of therapy to even have a remote chance at it. His response to the Michael Shermer book maybe being added to the reading list. Indeed, that's an important work. Like Stuart Vace's Believing in Magic, it is an ideal for teaching critical thought, though. I still haven't found the best book for that. I need something that covers Bayesian probability logic, cognitive science, and standard logic, fallacies, and rhetoric. And yes, I've thought about writing my own, but it will be years before I can find the time to. I also suggested that there be more real-world scenarios to test my practical application of critical thinking. He agreed with that and noted that he needs a bigger and more diverse collection of those. I also made a note of, in the main reading assignment, the Field Guide to Lies, Levitin talks at length about how he decided on the quote at the beginning of the book. And I think it's Mark Twain or whatever it was. And so he started thinking about the quote. And when he chose this one, he during the fact checking and the editing for the book, he wanted to make sure that it was actually a Mark Twain quote. And just read the. This is where it'd be a good idea to just read the book and his process for going through the fact checking. But it turns out it wasn't a Mark Twain quote, but he put it in there anyway. So I said, the main decision to do his due diligence to fact check the attribution seems to me the most crucial part in critical thinking is making the decision and constantly reminding yourself that you need to think critically. And I said, additionally, he made the decision not to even look at any books or quotations newer than 1928, apparently to cut down on the telephone effect game. I had some questions about that particular week's reading assignments also, one of which was, if expertise is relative, how do you convince someone that the expert you cited is valid? Expertise as a medical doctor equal years in the practice? If you're a lawyer, can you judge your expertise by number of cases won? For PhDs, is it the number of times you get cited by your peers? I worked with the NSA for 9 years, and I often cite myself when discussing and debating electronic surveillance, FISA warrants, the Patriot Act, and my opinion that Snowden is a traitor who got everything wrong, but I'm more often than not dismissed as an expert on the subject. So, what would it take for me to be recognized as a subject matter expert in, say, electronic surveillance? And Dr. Carey's response, well, I can't think of a legit reason to dismiss you on those credentials as an expert in the subject. But I suspect people who say that mean what you were talking about before about how Marines are biased, quote unquote, this kind of logic. And what he's talking about there is I was trying to I was trying to wrap my head around what an ad hominem really is. And I said, if someone is arguing for the Second Amendment and then they're dismissed because they're a Marine, and of course you're going to be for their Second Amendment because you work around weapons all the time and firearms, that would be a form of an ad hominem. And so that's what he's talking about here. So I suspect people who say that mean what you were talking about before about Marines are biased, this kind of logic, that I am too much a slave to the system to have a genuinely objective opinion about the ethics rather than the technicals of what Snowden did. I don't think that would be a sound objection either, but it would be a different objection than simply claiming that I was unqualified on the topic. I'd keep an eye on that bait and switch kind of argument. It reminds me that often in debates, the most useful thing to do early on is go straight to motives. Why do you care what the correct answer is in this matter? It works for literally everything and can be extremely revealing, often helpful in re-engineering your approach to discussing it with them. Another interesting interaction was this one. Is it an ad populum fallacy to rely too heavily on overwhelming majority of experts in a particular field? I do this a lot when talking to fundamentalists about, say, the Exodus from Egypt, for instance. Of course, the overwhelming majority of historians and archaeologists, whether religious or secular, agree that the Exodus never happened. And Dr. Carey replies, it would be as a deductive argument. Strictly speaking, a consensus never logically entails the conclusion. But the trick is, usually this is an inductive argument. No one is actually claiming the consensus logically entails the conclusion. Hence the exercise in converting fallacies in deductive logic into valid inductive arguments, like Bayesian or probabilistic. If someone says ad populum, just say, that's only if I was claiming it entailed the conclusion, and I'm not. I'm claiming the conclusion is unlikely to be false given this evidence, not impossible, just unlikely. People confuse those a lot, especially when they are driven by highly motivated reasoning, like Christians. The trick is then to remind them so they can't keep playing on that confusion. When they say, well, then you admit that a consensus can be wrong, you just say, sure, if the evidence is good enough. So where's the peer-reviewed evidence they are wrong? There was a lot of reading material also on expert testimony and when is it useful and how can it be misused. I had a question here regarding expert testimony. Can authority or notoriety outweigh sheer numbers? For example, 10,000 small business jujitsu senseis say that bent armbar method X is best, but a single former MMA champion says method Y is better. Richard responds, well, that example runs into the problem of sponsored rather than honest endorsement, assuming the claim is even true. One has to verify a source isn't literally being paid to say that before they even have a chance at being qualified to weigh in on it. There are some exceptions, but even they need corroborating evidence. As to the general question, I have become very sensitive to how arguments from prestige, where someone's prestige is cited as a substitute for expertise. This guy's from Yale, so obviously the other guy who studied at UT doesn't know what he's talking about, for instance. That is most definitely a fallacy, and an easy one to explain to people. Though if they are using this fallacy, they have already signaled emotion, not reason, is governing their decision matrix, so they aren't likely to listen. Also pertaining to expert testimony, I ask, Can an autodidact like Aaron Ra, who is frequently invited internationally to speak about his Phylogeny Explorer project, be as credible as, say, a first-year biology professor at a state university? This goes along the line of formal education. Richard then sent me some reading material to explain it, a vital primer on media literacy. He said this would apply. Generally, the point of degrees is they establish someone has been vetted. So when someone doesn't have a degree, you need an expert to vet them, and most won't have the time or won't care. But if someone has been vetted, Aaron Ra pretty well has, he's rarely caught out making a mistake in cladistics, for example, although that doesn't make him an expert on everything like philosophy or physics, a common mistake people make. Then you can count on them for treating them as worth your time as a starting point, but I wouldn't use them to cite at others. Rather, I'd use them the way I used peer-reviewed reference books, like the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church. I use them as a source for collecting the claims that probably hold up and for their bibliography, and then fact-check those claims in the bibliography or elsewhere. In other words, amateurs like Aaron Ra can be useful heuristics, efficient pathways to discover facts that hold up. But ultimately, if you want to use this in an argument to someone else, you still need to back up what they say in professional sourcing. During the section on logical fallacies, specifically the ad hominem, I cited a few names that always get brought up in conversation whenever there's an ad hominem, seems like. Lawrence Krauss, Michael Shermer, David Silverman are often disregarded, even though they might be experts in the subject matter. They're disregarded due to the controversies in their own personal lives. Or Richard Dawkins and Robert Price because of controversies socio-politically. And I don't understand why people can't understand that whatever an expert says or does outside of their field of expertise is irrelevant to the conversation at hand. And Dr. Carey responds, that's emotional reasoning. The only solution is to keep pointing this out. Dawkins is not wrong about genetics because he is wrong about social issues. And then question why someone would think that. Ask them to explain themselves. You'll either get two responses, acquiescence to the point or a runaway. Either result is worthwhile. Maybe there will be some disingenuous rigmarole before they acquiesce or run away, i.e., a lame emotional attempt to defend their dismissal, but with any pushback, it will always end in one or the other. So, to sum up, if you think you might need some additional training on how to better evaluate truth claims, you need to take this course. If you feel like your critical thinking skills need no improvement whatsoever, you really need to take this course. Again, this entire video series is not a paid promotional endorsement, although sometimes it sounded like it. I think I've given it a fair shake on both sides, looked at it from both angles. It was a very valuable course. I'm glad I took it. I highly recommend that you give it a shot. And Dr. Carrier has a whole host of additional courses to take, not just critical thinking. This is just one in a huge series of courses. So yeah, it's not a paid endorsement. And to prove this isn't a paid endorsement, I took a few notes of items of constructive criticism. First one, I understand why you're not evaluated on this, but I think it would be good to get some sort of evaluation throughout the course, like pop tests, some maybe little 10-question progress checks, sprinkled throughout the course just to test if we're retaining some of the key information. That I think that would be good. Second is, it's not really on Richard, it's more just the philosophy itself, but why are we still calling all these logical fallacies by their Latin name? I mean, you can just say argument from incredulity or the bandwagon technique. Why do we have to say, ad populum or post hoc ergo propter hoc? We can just say what they are. I don't. It seems pretentious to me to have to use the Latin. The English versions are usually much more succinct anyway. There's no sense in learning the Latin. There's a lot of math in this. I've already warned you numerous times. If you're not good at math like me, then it's going to be kind of a learning curve. Don't let that scare you. Um, Take a lot of notes. Like I said, I took like 50 something pages of notes, and you're going to go back and refer to these a lot if you're taking critical thinking seriously. And lastly, I really admire Dr. Carrier's uh, insistence on getting all the courses done. There was a point, I think it was around week 3, where that last challenge question I just didn't have time for, and I was going to move on to week 4 because we were already in week 4, and Richard said, really, you can do that if you want, but I really insist that you go back and at least give it a try. I think that's good leadership. That's good looking out for the students. He wants you to have, a fair. He doesn't want you to cut any corners, which is admirable. So I'd like to thank Dr. Carrier for his time, his insights, his patience, and especially all the thorough replies. I'm going to keep this. It's a lot to digest. I'll be referring back to it frequently, and since life is a never-ending chain of self-improvement, I'll be referring back to my notes and to all this course material probably very often.